Inside CECOT Prison, world's deadliest inmates and gang secrets exposed. The Vanishing Street. Before we begin, hit subscribe, drop a comment, and like this video, because once you step inside CECOT, you'll want to remember how you got here. The streetlights of San Salvador flickered against the midnight rain. Patrol cars rolled down narrow alleys, sirens muted, headlights cut. For months, the city had been locked in a silent war, one side armed with badges and rifles, the other with tattoos and whispered codes. MS-13 and Barrio 18, two of the world's most infamous gangs, once ruled these blocks with fear. Extortion payments collected from market vendors, disappearances of those who refused, and murders that painted the pavements red. But now everything had changed. President Nayib Bukele's state of exception had turned the streets into a hunting ground. Mass arrests unfolded daily, thousands pulled from homes, buses, construction sites. Some were guilty, many were not. Men barely out of their teens, covered in gang ink from scalp to shin, were shackled and dragged into waiting trucks. Others, with no record at all, found themselves accused by anonymous tips, neighbors settling grudges, or police looking to meet quotas. The destination was always the same. CECOT, the Centro de Confinamiento del Terrorismo, a prison built for one purpose: total control. But the story doesn't begin inside its walls. It begins with a body found in the rain. Detective Rafael Herrera zipped his jacket against the storm as he crouched near the riverbank. The crime scene was lit by a pair of halogen lamps, their glow bouncing off the water like broken glass. A young man lay face down in the mud, hands bound with plastic restraints, a jagged tattoo of MS curling across the back of his skull. He had been shot twice in the chest, execution style. But what chilled Herrera most was not the killing itself. It was the note pinned to the man's shirt, written in hurried ink: CECOT is not enough. We still command the streets. The handwriting was crude, but the message was clear. Even with thousands locked away, the gangs were speaking. Herrera had seen this pattern before. Leaders inside prison cells giving orders that rippled outward like waves. Hits ordered from solitary confinement, drug routes mapped on scraps of paper smuggled out by guards for hire. CECOT was supposed to end that. Its walls were concrete, its cameras unblinking, its cells sealed tight. Yet here was proof: someone inside still had power. As Herrera scanned the area, he noticed something else. A cell phone, half buried in the mud. He pulled on gloves, retrieved it, and slipped it into an evidence bag. The screen was cracked, waterlogged, but still flickered with life. And on that screen, a draft message unsent. A single word typed into it: hermano, brother. Who was he trying to reach? That night, while the rain still hammered the city, buses loaded with prisoners pulled into CECOT's towering gate. Cameras captured the spectacle for government propaganda. Thousands of shirtless, tattooed men forced to kneel, shackled at wrists and ankles, heads pressed to the ground. Military guards in black masks shouted commands as if orchestrating a ritual. Images went viral, hailed by supporters as proof that El Salvador was taking back its street. But Herrera saw something different. He saw desperation. Men stripped of power, yet clinging to invisible chains of loyalty that stretched from cell to barrio. He had worked homicide long enough to know, prisons don't always stop gangs. Sometimes they sharpen them. Inside CECOT, the reality was colder than any photo could show. Cells stacked 6 bunks high, each with metal slabs for beds. Food slid through hatches, water rationed. No sunlight. No visits. Prisoners disappeared into routines of concrete and silence, watched by towers bristling with rifles. But in silence, codes flourished, passed through eye contact, gestures, and the smallest scratches carved into walls. And if the note pinned to that corpse was right, CECOT was not yet sealed tight. 3 days later, Herrera sat across from a woman in a small interrogation room at the police station. She was trembling, her hands wrapped around a cheap plastic rosary. Her name was Marisol, sister to the dead man found by the river. He wasn't a leader, she whispered. He cleaned buses. He had tattoos, yes, but everyone has tattoos here. They said he was MS, but he left them years ago. They took him anyway. They said if he didn't confess, they would take me, too. Herrera studied her face. The fear was real. But was the story? In El Salvador, truth was always buried under layers of fear and allegiance. Do you know who he was trying to reach? Herrera asked, sliding the bagged cell phone onto the table. Her eyes widened. For a moment, she hesitated. Then she shook her head. No, but if you have that phone, you're already in danger. Herrera leaned back, frustration gnawing at him. The gangs thrived on silence. No one spoke unless forced, and even then, lies were safer than truth. By the end of the week, another body surfaced. This time, it was not a gang member. It was a low-level prison guard from CECOT, found in his car with 2 bullets in his skull. On the dashboard, scrawled in blood, were 3 letters, 18S. Barrio 18 Sureños. The message was unmistakable. The gangs were still moving, still reaching. And if guards were compromised, then Herrera's fears were right. CECOT's walls had already been breached. At headquarters, tension boiled. Officials wanted to suppress the news, claiming it would undermine the image of control the government had worked so hard to project. But Herrera knew the truth couldn't be buried forever. And the phone, still drying out in the lab, might hold the key. When the forensic techs cracked it, fragments of messages emerged. Short, encrypted notes, fragments of names. And one recurring reference, El Fantasma, the ghost. A leader no one had seen, no one had captured, yet whose orders rippled across barrios and even within CECOT itself. Herrera had heard whispers of the name before. Some said El Fantasma was an MS-13 shot caller locked inside CECOT's deepest wing. Others insisted he was already dead, a ghost in every sense. But the phone said otherwise. The ghost was alive, and pulling strings. The detective knew what this meant. To find answers, he would need to get inside. Not as a guard, not as an investigator on the outside looking in. He would have to step into CECOT itself, into the belly of the concrete beast, and confront the whispers face to face. But entering meant crossing a line. Once inside, no one was safe, not even law enforcement. Guards disappeared, investigations went silent, files closed without reason. The state promised order. The gangs promised revenge. And somewhere in between lay the truth. That night, Herrera stared at the glowing map of CECOT pinned on his wall. 10 pavilions, each a fortress within a fortress. No contact with the outside world, or so the government claimed. Yet corpses outside told another story. He traced his finger along Pavilion 8, the rumored stronghold of high-ranking MS-13. If the ghost was anywhere, it would be there. Rain tapped the glass. A storm was gathering, both outside and in. By dawn, Herrera had made his choice. He would go inside. Not officially, no press releases, no announcements. A covert entry, arranged with the few allies he still trusted in the ministry. He would pose as an inspector, blend in with a routine sweep, and slip into Pavilion 8. But as he packed his files, the evidence bag with the phone, and his revolver, a thought gnawed at him. Once he stepped into CECOT, he might not come out. Still, the message on the corpse echoed in his mind. CECOT is not enough. And then another voice, one he couldn't shake. El Fantasma. The gates of CECOT loomed like the jaws of a beast. Guards checked papers, dogs barked, rifles glinted in the sun. Herrera's heart pounded as he stepped through, the clang of steel echoing like a sentence. Rows of prisoners knelt in the yard, their tattoos like maps of violence, their eyes sharp despite the shackles. Cameras tracked every movement, but it felt like the inmates were the ones watching him. Inside Pavilion 8, the air grew heavier. Concrete swallowed sound. Herrera moved deeper, flanked by 2 guards who looked more nervous than he felt. Cells lined the walls, faces pressing against slits, whispers curling through the darkness. And then, as if on cue, one voice called out. A hoarse, mocking laugh, followed by words that chilled Herrera's blood. "Welcome, detective. We've been expecting you." The ghost in the walls. The echo of that voice lingered long after the guard's boots had stopped clanging on the concrete. "Welcome, detective. We've been expecting you." It wasn't shouted, it wasn't whispered. It was said with a calm, cold certainty that made the air in Pavilion 8 feel 10 degrees colder. Detective Rafael Herrera paused, his eyes darting across the rows of cells. Shadows shifted behind the slits in the steel doors, tattoos coiled like snakes across bare skin, teeth flashing in half-smiles. He couldn't see the speaker. He didn't need to. The words were a message: "You're inside now. You're not in control." The 2 guards flanking him stiffened, hands tightening on their rifles. Herrera knew they were scared. Not of the inmates, they had guns after all, but of something far worse. Inside CECOT, everyone feared betrayal. Guards had been caught smuggling messages, drugs, even weapons, tempted by gang money or threatened by families outside. The gangs didn't need open violence to win. They only needed whispers, signals, and fear. Herrera forced his breathing steady. He wasn't here to show weakness. He was here to find the ghost. CECOT's architecture was designed for one thing: containment. The walls were a suffocating gray, the cells windowless, the corridors patrolled in pairs. But for Herrera, each step deeper into Pavilion 8 felt less like containment and more like descent, into a labyrinth where every corner held secrets. "Which block?" Herrera asked, his voice low. The senior guard hesitated. "Cell block D. That's where the shot callers are." "And surveillance?" "Every inch is monitored. Cameras, motion sensors." But the guard's words caught as if strangled. "The feeds, sometimes they cut out. Just for seconds. We don't know why. IT blames old wiring, but Herrera understood. In prisons, technology was only as strong as the humans guarding it. If cameras went dark, it wasn't wiring. It was corruption. As they walked, inmates pressed their faces against the slots in the steel doors, eyes glittering like predators behind cages. Some hissed insults. Others stayed silent, watching. One man lifted a finger to his lips in a gesture of quiet, then dragged it slowly across his throat. The guards shifted nervously, but Herrera felt something else: curiosity. These weren't random taunts. They were signals. Codes he couldn't yet decipher. At cell block D, the corridor narrowed. The smell of sweat and iron hung in the air. The guard unlocked the heavy door, and the group stepped into a deeper silence. "Keep moving," the younger guard urged. "We don't stay here long." But Herrera stopped. His instincts screamed that something was off. Unlike the other blocks, this one felt too quiet. No hissing, no banging on doors. Just silence. And silence in a prison was never natural. He approached one of the cells, peering into the slit. Inside, a man sat cross-legged on the floor, tattoos curling up his chest and across his scalp. His eyes, dark and unblinking, fixed on Herrera. He didn't move, didn't speak. But behind him, scrawled faintly on the wall, Herrera saw a word etched into the concrete: Phantasma. His heart skipped. "Who wrote that?" Herrera asked through the slot. The man tilted his head, lips curling into a slow smile. "We all did." Back in the control room, Herrera demanded access to surveillance records. The technician, a tired-looking officer with deep bags under his eyes, hesitated before pulling up the feeds. Pavilion 8 flickered onto the monitors. Cell after cell, men pacing, men sitting, men staring at nothing. "Rewind to last week," Herrera ordered. The footage spun backward. At first, nothing unusual. Then, in the corner of one screen, a glitch. For 3 seconds, the feed cut to static. When it returned, a folded piece of paper appeared on the floor outside a cell. A guard walked by, paused, kicked the paper discreetly into the cell, and kept walking. Herrera's stomach clenched. "Who is that guard?" he demanded. The technician's face paled. "Officer Mendez. He's been here only 6 months. Herrera knew what that meant. New guards were the easiest to recruit. Few had loyalty to the state. Many had debts. All had fears. Where is he now? Off shift. Lives in Soyapango. Herrera made a note. He would find Mendez. But for now, he had to stay focused. That night, Herrera returned to his hotel room near downtown San Salvador. Rain streaked the window, headlights flashing on the wet streets below. He laid out the evidence on the bed. The corpse's note, the waterlogged phone, the surveillance still of Mendez kicking the paper. Together, they painted a picture, but one with missing pieces. The phone fragments had revealed a name, El Fantasma. The cell wall carried the same word. And now, a guard smuggling notes inside Pavilion 8. It all pointed to one thing. The ghost was real and he was active. But how? CECOT was supposed to be airtight. No visits, no phones, no communication. The ghost shouldn't even exist. Unless he wasn't just an inmate. Unless he had help from inside the system itself. 2 days later, Herrera tracked down Officer Mendez. The young guard lived in a crumbling apartment building, paint peeling, garbage piled in stairwells. Herrera waited in his car until Mendez returned from his shift, then followed him into the dimly lit hallway. "Mendez," Herrera called. The guard froze, hand tightening on his keys. His eyes darted nervously. "Who are you?" "Police." "Homicide." Herrera flashed his badge. "We need to talk." Mendez swallowed hard. "I don't know anything." "Then it'll be quick." Inside the apartment, Herrera scanned the room. Cheap furniture, half-empty beer bottles, a television flickering static. On the table lay a stack of cash, rolled tight with a rubber band. "Side income?" Herrera asked. Mendez shook his head, sweat forming on his brow. "It's for my mother." "Medical bills." "Who gave it to you?" Mendez hesitated, then muttered, "I can't." Herrera leaned in, voice low. "A guard's already dead. Found shot in his car. You want to be next." Mendez's composure cracked. He sank into a chair, head in his hands. "They said if I didn't help, they'd kill her." "My mother." "They know where she lives." "Who said?" Mendez looked up, eyes wide with fear. "The ghost. He's inside, but he's not just inside. He sees everything." That night, Herrera filed a report but kept most of the details hidden. If Mendez was right, the conspiracy reached far deeper than one smuggled note. The ghost had his claws not just in inmates, but in guards, families, entire neighborhood. Back in Pavilion 8, Herrera arranged another inspection. This time, he wanted to walk alone, without guards. It was reckless, but he needed answers. As he passed the cells, whispers followed him like smoke. "Detective, Hermano, ghost," the voices blended, a chorus of taunts and warnings. Then, from one cell, a slip of paper slid through the slot and fluttered to the floor. Herrera froze, then picked it up. Scrawled in jagged ink was a single line, "Find me, and you'll find the bodies." His blood ran cold. That evening, Herrera met with Marisol again. She sat across from him in the police cafeteria, clutching the rosary as always. "They killed another guard," Herrera told her. "Your brother's death wasn't random. It was a message." Marisol's eyes filled with tears. "I told you. He wasn't MS anymore. He wanted out. But no one ever really leaves." Herrera slid the note across the table. "Do you know this handwriting?" She glanced at it, then shook her head. "No, but I've heard the name. Phantasma. They say he doesn't exist. That he's just a story to keep fear alive. But stories kill, too. Herrera leaned forward. If he's a story, he's writing it in blood. The pressure mounted. The ministry wanted quick result. The public demanded proof that CECOT was working. But Herrera knew that behind the concrete walls, the gangs had adapted. They always did. Cut off one arm, another grew. Lock them in cells, they found ways to whisper. And now, with the ghost pulling strings, the violence outside was rising again. 2 more bodies turned up that week, both small-time extortionists, both marked with tattoos, both executed with identical shots to the chest. Each carried the same note pinned to their shirts: CECOT is not enough. One night, Herrera returned to Pavilion 8 with a hidden recorder strapped under his jacket. He needed proof, voices, something tangible. As he walked the corridor, the inmates seemed restless, pacing, whispering. Then, from the darkness, a voice rose above the rest. "You want the ghost?" it said. Herrera stopped. "Where is he?" Laughter rippled through the cells. "Closer than you think. Tell me." Silence, then a whisper. "He's not behind bars. He's behind the bars you can't see." Herrera's pulse quickened. What did that mean? Was the ghost even a prisoner? Or was he something worse? A phantom embedded in the very system, untouchable, invisible? As Herrera exited the pavilion, the recorder still humming, he felt a chill. The storm outside mirrored the storm inside him. Each clue twisted the truth further, dragging him deeper into a labyrinth of lies. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Because in the shadows of CECOT, the ghost was watching. Waiting. And every step closer to him meant more bodies on the street. And the next one might be Herrera's. Blood in the shadows. The night air clung heavy with humidity as Detective Rafael Herrera replayed the recorder's whispers for the 15th time. The words hissed through the speaker like a serpent in the dark. He's not behind bars. He's behind the bars you can't see. The ghost was taunting him, and Herrera knew it. Every step he took, every lead he chased, was being watched. The problem was simple but lethal. He couldn't tell if the eyes belonged to gang lookouts on the streets or corrupt officers inside the ministry. And now, after weeks of circling shadows, the first sign of retaliation had appeared. It came in the form of a phone call at 2:13 a.m. The shrill ring pierced the silence of Herrera's apartment. He reached for the receiver, heart already pounding. "Detective." The voice was trembling, female. "Marisol." "They came," she whispered. "Men outside my window. I heard them. I don't know who. They left something on the door. Stay inside. Lock everything." Herrera was already pulling on his jacket, gun holstered at his hip. "I'll be there in 10 minutes. The streets blurred as he sped through the city, headlights streaking over cracked pavement. When he arrived at her apartment, the doorframe bore a chilling mark, 3 crude letters scratched into the wood with a blade. MSN. Marisol stood pale in the doorway, clutching her rosary. "What does it mean?" Herrera scanned the mark. MS-13. "It's a warning. They know you talked to me." Her eyes widened. "But I didn't. They don't care. The ghost wants silence, and threats work better than bullets. For now." Herrera moved her into protective custody that night, but he knew it was a fragile shield. Resources were thin, corruption ran deep, and hiding someone from gangs with eyes everywhere was like hiding a candle in the dark. One gust, and it was gone. The next morning, he stormed into ministry headquarters. Files and maps were scattered across his office desk, pinned with notes and photos. The bodies, the notes pinned to shirts, the guard Mendez's confession, the graffiti of Phantasma inside Pavilion 8. His superior, Colonel Alvarez, leaned in the doorway, arms folded. "You're making noise, Herrera. Too much noise." "People are dying," Herrera snapped. "The ghost is inside CECOT, but he's reaching out. Guards, families, the streets. We can't keep pretending it's airtight. Alvarez's eyes narrowed. Be careful. The president wants results, not doubts. If you undermine the image, you undermine the state. Herrera stared at him. For a moment, he wondered if Alvarez was warning him or threatening him. That evening, Herrera decided to confront Mendez again. He needed more. Something concrete. But when he arrived at the guard's apartment, the door was ajar. The smell hit first, iron and rot. Inside, Mendez lay sprawled across the floor, a pool of blood spreading beneath him. 2 gunshots, clean and precise. Execution style. On the wall above his body, smeared in crimson, were 2 words written with a finger dipped in blood. And no more. Herrera's throat tightened. The ghost had silenced another mouth. And this time, the warning was personal. He scanned the room. The cash was gone. The television, the bottles, all untouched. This wasn't robbery. It was cleanup. A message. Anyone who talked would die. And if Mendez was dead, the list of Herrera's potential allies was shrinking fast. The next week blurred into endless interrogations. Herrera pressed guards, inmates, even families outside CECOT. The answer was always the same: silence. Until one man broke. Officer Delgado, a veteran guard with 20 years behind walls, finally pulled Herrera aside in the smoking yard of the ministry. His eyes were hollow, his hands trembling as he lit a cigarette. You won't find the ghost, Delgado muttered. Not because he's a phantom, but because he has protection. High protection. What do you mean? Delgado flicked ash to the ground. I mean he's not just another inmate barking orders. He has friends in uniform, in suits, maybe even in the palace. Herrera's pulse quickened. You're saying he's working with the government? Delgado didn't answer. He just stared at the ground. Then he whispered, Watch your back, detective. Or you'll end up like Mendez. That night, Herrera sat in his car outside CECOT, rain hammering the windshield. His notebook was filled with fragments, but no answers. The ghost is alive. The ghost is inside. The ghost is outside. The ghost has protection. But one truth was clear. Every time he closed in, someone else died. And now, Marisol was in protective custody because of him. If the gangs knew she'd spoken, she was a target. If the state knew she'd given him leads, she was disposable. The line between state and gang was blurring. And Herrera was caught in the middle. The breaking point came with another body. This one was different. It wasn't a gang member. It wasn't a guard. It was a priest. Father Miguel, known for mediating between gangs and families, was found strangled in his parish office. On his desk sat a Bible, open to a single underlined verse: The wages of sin is death. Pinned to the Bible was a note: El Fantasma speaks. The murder sent shockwaves through the city. 4 years, priests had been off limits, a neutral line even the gangs rarely crossed. Killing one was sacrilege. It was also a declaration: the ghost no longer cared about rules. Herrera attended the crime scene, his chest heavy. As he scanned the office, he saw a faint smear on the window sill. He leaned closer. It wasn't blood. It was ash. Cigarette ash. The same brand Delgado smoked. A chill ran through him. The next day, Delgado was gone. No trace. No calls. His apartment stripped bare. Herrera demanded answers, but his superiors shrugged. He probably ran. Couldn't handle the pressure. But Herrera knew better. Delgado hadn't run. He had vanished, pulled into the shadows, silenced like the rest. And with his disappearance, Herrera felt the noose tightening. Late one evening, as Herrera reviewed files in his dim office, his phone buzzed. An unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. A distorted voice rasped through static. Detective Herrera. You're getting close. Too close. Who is this? Laughter, hollow and cold. You know who. You're chasing ghosts, but ghosts can chase too. Herrera gripped the receiver. What do you want? The voice lowered, almost a whisper. Stop digging. Or we'll bury you with the others. The line went dead. Sleep eluded him. Each night, dreams twisted into visions of shackled men in endless corridors, their tattoos shifting into words. CECOT is not enough. He woke with sweat soaking his sheets, the echoes of laughter still in his ears. But exhaustion wasn't his enemy. Fear was. And fear was exactly what the ghost wanted. Herrera decided he needed to go back inside Pavilion 8. Alone. No guards. No allies. If the ghost was real, if he truly commanded both prisoners and streets, then the answers had to lie in the heart of CECOT. The night of his return, the sky split with thunder. Herrera slipped through the gates under the guise of a late-night inspection. The prison was eerily still, the corridors empty, the hum of surveillance cameras the only sound. As he entered Pavilion 8, the silence pressed down like a weight. Inmates stirred, eyes glinting from the shadows. Whispers rippled, rising like a tide. Then, a cell door slammed. Herrera spun, gun drawn. But it wasn't an escape. It was a message. A single cell door closing on its own, though no guard had touched it. And from inside that cell, a voice. Calm, controlled, familiar. Detective. You're persistent. That will get you killed. Herrera's chest tightened. The ghost. The man stepped into the light of the slit window. Tattoos covered his face, but his eyes were sharp, calculating. He smiled. You've been looking for me. But tell me, did you ever wonder why no one will stop me? Why every lead dies? Herrera's grip on his gun tightened. Because you kill them. The ghost shook his head slowly. No, detective. Because they work for me. Guards. Officers. Politicians. Even your colonel. You're not fighting gangs. You're fighting a system. And systems don't bleed. Herrera's mind raced. If this was true, then everything, Mendez, Delgado, even Alvarez, was part of the ghost's reach. The prison wasn't containing crime. It was incubating it. And standing here, face to face with the man who had turned CECOT into his command center, Herrera realized the truth. He was already trapped. Because if the ghost controlled the system, then Herrera wasn't hunting him. The ghost had been hunting Herrera all along. The last cell. The concrete swallowed his breath. The ghost's words still echoed in Detective Rafael Herrera's skull. You're not fighting gangs. You're fighting a system. And systems don't bleed. He stood frozen in Pavilion 8, gun raised but useless, surrounded by rows of cells that suddenly felt less like cages and more like walls closing in. Behind the narrow slits, eyes glowed with silent amusement. Every inmate knew. Every whisper confirmed it. The ghost wasn't just inside these walls. He was the walls. Herrera forced his voice steady. If you're so powerful, why show yourself to me? The ghost's smile widened. Because you're already mine, detective. Every step you've taken, every name you've spoken, every note you've collected, it all leads here. And now the world will know what happens to those who dig too deep. Herrera's finger hovered on the trigger. He could end it right now, one shot through the slit, one body crumpling to the floor. But the thought gnawed at him. What if this man wasn't the ghost? What if he was only another pawn? Killing him might silence the wrong voice, while the real phantom laughed from deeper shadows. Before he could act, a hand clamped on his shoulder. Detective, a guard whispered, pale under the dim light. It was Officer Ramirez, one of the few Herrera had trusted. We need to go. Now. Not yet, Herrera hissed. But Ramirez's grip tightened. Listen to me, there's an order out. They're coming for you. Not the inmate. Our own men. Herrera's blood chilled. Who gave the order? Ramirez's eyes flicked toward the ceiling cameras. Higher than either of us can reach. They moved quickly through the corridors, boots echoing in rhythm. Herrera's mind raced. If Alvarez had turned, if the ministry itself was compromised, then every report he'd filed, every piece of evidence he'd logged, was already in enemy hands. He wasn't the hunter anymore. He was prey. As they approached the exit, the sirens blared. Red lights washed the walls. Metal doors slammed shut one by one, sealing off sections of the prison. "They know," Ramirez muttered. "They're locking us in." Herrera drew his revolver. "We find another way." The prison shifted into chaos. Inmates howled from their cells, fists pounding metal, voices rising like a storm. The lockdown was their symphony, a signal that something big was happening. Herrera and Ramirez ducked into a service corridor, narrow and dark, pipes hissing overhead. At the end of the passage, 2 guards stood blocking the way. Their rifles were raised, but their eyes were cold, detached. Not confused. Not panicked. Controlled. One spoke. "Detective Herrera." "You're coming with us," Ramirez whispered. "They're not here to protect you." Herrera raised his revolver. "If I go on my feet." The standoff stretched, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing in the silence. Then, like a crack of thunder, a shot rang out. One guard dropped, clutching his throat. The other swung his rifle, but Ramirez fired again, dropping him instantly. Smoke curled in the air. The silence that followed was deafening. "Move," Ramirez urged. They pushed deeper into the service corridors, turning corners, descending stairwells that twisted like veins through the concrete beast. At every junction, Herrera expected more guards, more guns. But what haunted him most wasn't the danger ahead, it was the laughter behind, echoing faintly through the halls. The ghost's voice, carried by inmates repeating his words, taunted him. "Systems don't bleed." Finally, they reached a maintenance door. Ramirez jammed his keycard, but the reader blinked red. "Locked." "We're trapped," he muttered. Herrera slammed his fist against the steel. "There has to be another way." Then he noticed it, scratches on the wall near the floor, faint but deliberate. Letters carved into the concrete. "Elige." Spanish for choose. Beneath it, 2 arrows scratched into the wall, one pointing left, one pointing right. "What the hell?" Ramirez whispered. Herrera's chest tightened. This wasn't a map. It was a message. The ghost knew they'd be here. He was steering them, even now. They chose left. The passage narrowed into a tunnel lit by a single flickering bulb. The air was damp, heavy with mildew. At the end, a metal gate barred the way. Beyond it, Herrera could see the faint glow of daylight filtering through ventilation grates. Freedom was close, yet impossibly far. As Ramirez fiddled with the lock, a voice rose from the shadows behind them. "You've come far, detective." Herrera spun, gun aimed. From the darkness, the same tattooed face emerged. The ghost. But this time, he wasn't behind bars. He was here, in the open corridor, flanked by 2 masked men with rifles. Ramirez froze. "How?" The ghost raised a hand, silencing him. "Did you really think these walls held me? I built them. I walk them. I own them." Herrera's mouth went dry. "You're not supposed to be out of your cell." The ghost smiled. "Cells are for men without power. I have power." He stepped closer, eyes glinting under the dim light. "You've chased me, detective. You've bled for the truth. So let me give it to you. The truth is simple. CECOT is my palace. Bukele built it to bury us, but all he did was gather my army in one place. I don't command from shadows anymore. I command from the heart." Herrera's hand trembled on the revolver. He had one shot. One chance. But the rifles aimed at him meant suicide. Still, he asked, "Why me? Why taunt me?" The ghost's grin turned cruel. "Because you remind me of myself. You think you can change a system already poisoned. But in the end, you'll break. Everyone does." The sound came suddenly, boots pounding, shouts echoing through the corridor. Guards stormed in, weapons raised. For a heartbeat, Herrera thought backup had arrived. But then he saw Alvarez at the front, his superior's face calm, almost serene. "Detective Herrera," Alvarez said, voice steady. "Put down your weapon. You're finished here." Herrera's stomach dropped. The betrayal was complete. Alvarez wasn't just compromised, he was part of it. "You're with him," Herrera whispered. Alvarez didn't deny it. "CECOT is order. And order needs the ghost. He keeps the chaos contained. You stir it. And we can't have that." The ghost chuckled softly. "You see now, detective? I am not hidden. I am endorsed." The rifles leveled at Herrera. Ramirez tensed, his finger white on the trigger. The corridor smelled of gun oil, sweat, inevitability. Herrera took one last breath, then whispered, "Systems may not bleed. But men do." He fired. The bullet tore into Alvarez's shoulder, spinning him back. Chaos erupted, rifles barking, bullets ricocheting. Ramirez dropped one of the masked men before a round slammed into his chest, flinging him against the wall. He slid down, blood blooming across his uniform. Herrera dove for cover, returning fire. The corridor filled with smoke and screams. In the chaos, the ghost slipped into the shadows, vanishing like mist. By the time the gunfire ceased, only silence remained. Bodies littered the floor. Alvarez was gone. The ghost was gone. And Herrera was alone, his revolver empty, his chest heaving. He staggered through the ventilation grate, emerging into the night air. Rain soaked his face, mingling with sweat and blood. In the distance, San Salvador's lights flickered like stars, oblivious to the war raging in its shadows. He had survived. But he hadn't won. Because the ghost was still alive. Still commanding. Still untouchable. And Herrera knew the truth would never see daylight. His reports would vanish, files shredded, evidence buried. Official statements would frame him as rogue, unstable, a detective who lost his way. But the message burned in his mind: CECOT is not enough. Weeks later, headlines blared across El Salvador: homicide detective suspended amid allegations of misconduct. Herrera's name was dragged through mud, his cases reassigned, his credibility shattered. He became a ghost himself, haunting cheap motels, scribbling notes in the margins of old case files, replaying the whispers that had led him to the edge. Marisol disappeared from protective custody. Some said she fled the country. Others said she never made it past the border. And on the streets, murder rates dipped, extortion slowed, and the government celebrated. But in the barrios, in the whispered codes of tattooed men shackled in cells, one name passed from lips to lips like a prayer and a curse. El Fantasma. The ghost lived. Herrera stood one night on a rooftop overlooking the city, cigarette smoke curling into the dark. He thought of Mendez, Delgado, Ramirez, Marisol. All gone. All silenced. He whispered to himself, voice hoarse, "You can bury the truth. But ghosts don't stay buried." Far below, in a dim alley, a boy no older than 16 slipped a note into a dealer's hand. On the paper, a single phrase was scrawled: CECOT is not enough. And somewhere, unseen, the ghost laughed.